Today, Joe Casson is joining us. He currently is the VP of Solution Engineering at Qualified. In this conversation, Joe discusses the evolution of product development and his experiences at Qualified and Optimizely. Some key topics we're going to cover with Joe today. Evolution of product. What does that look like? Catalyst for product change. Understanding the competitive landscape and really having a way to gather feedback in an appropriate way. And having internal empathy within your organization. Let's talk about those topics with Joe. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Jeremy. It's great to be here.
Yeah. One of the things that comes to mind for both of us is really that evolution of product that you've seen at both Qualified and Optimizely and maybe beyond. Would you mind speaking to the evolution of product, like maybe one product to many, or how a specific product has evolved a bit for you?
Sure. I mean, I think my best example with product evolution probably comes from Qualified, since I saw most of it through Qualified's origins. I joined the company Qualified when we were still in a one-bedroom apartment in Soma of San Francisco. Just to really paint the vision, you could literally hear the toilet flush in the back of my sales calls sometimes. There was
awesome.
There was not much in the way of actually like a full-fledged product. And even at one point in one of our early releases, we were launching something called Qualified for ABM. And I asked my CEO and colleague, Craig, what is this? And he goes, I don't know yet, but we're going to figure it out. And that was kind of the attitude that we had to take early on. Yeah. It was the attitude that we had to take at the time, because we knew that there were ideas and concepts that hadn't gotten enough attention in the market with the current solutions, even though it looked like the market had already been quote unquote won by some of the major players. But because we had a slightly different perspective coming in, that got me engaged to even join the company we were at 7. I think I was employee 10. That we thought that deserved fleshing out. So we didn't know what things like Qualified for ABM meant, but we figured those things out. And so it was it's now been 4.5 years since then. And so I've seen quite a few different evolutions from one singular product that we started with around conversations and chatbots and automating pipeline generation on your website, to gathering more intent signals, to booking more meetings, all in this sort of ever-evolving vision of what are we for who are we over time.
What was the catalyst for that change from like initial chat conversation to something more?
So it actually, I think I'll rewind the clock even before I joined, because it started with our co-founders. They're a group of 4 guys. They had all worked together before. It was Craig, Sean, Bing, and Gopal. And they had founded a company previously. So they knew they all went their separate ways for a little while and then came back together and wanted to start again. And the way that they actually came back together is they said, okay, we're all going to pitch each other ideas on what we think could be products for the company, and like what we actually would go and build. So they would build decks, and they would essentially try to sell the other 3 on, hey, we think this is the thing to go and build.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, it was kind of like an internal like bake-off of who had the best idea. And there was everything from what we have now with chatbots to and really it was like a real-time human conversations, but also other things like sports gambling and even what I think was the next evolution of after chatbots came things like signals. So signals was an idea that started with you're going to be gathering so much information about visitors that are coming to your website that we'll be able to tell you with all of this data who are the accounts that are showing intent. And so it's a little bit of the background, because as Qualified started to gain some traction in the marketplace, yes, we were the gateway for people to have more conversations, bot or human, on your website. But just by simply being sprinkled around the website to have those conversations, you're obviously gathering a bunch of data. Where are people spending their time? How long are they spending it there? When are they starting conversations? What's getting them to book a meeting? And so all of these little data points became signal, which was an idea that they had in the infancy, decided to go a different direction, but then it just sort of came back around. And I think this almost becomes one of the topic areas of what to build next. And a lot of the decision making that we've followed here at Qualified is what feels like the natural next step, like what feels like not only what people are asking for, but what already ties into our architecture, what is part of how people think about our product in general. And part of with Qualified and generating and having conversations is it's all in service of generating more pipeline. Like the core problem that they decided to solve that they knew intimately well was you have a web property, a website, you're going to try to generate more pipeline. One of those is people buy from humans. So allow human conversations to exist on your website in a more cohesive and sufficiently complex way. But the resulting ask after that is, okay, now we're having so much information. We already have all this data. We want to go and get more people to come to our website or make sure that we're not missing people that didn't start a conversation. Because we all know that we don't always click on the chat with a person on the website. So how do we make sure that we don't miss those? And so Signals felt like a natural evolution of the product in that marketplace. And there have been several things that have come after that, but I think Signals probably provided a lot of learnings of what to do and what not to do, maybe more importantly, than other products.
Can I ask a little bit about the catalyst to some of these product decisions? So it sounds like if I read this or listen to this correctly, the first couple of products from Qualified were a little bit started at the incubation state. Just the idea began germinating back at that point and really just evolved as the product evolved with its customer usage. You mentioned there's some product evolution since that time. How have you guys balanced this kind of intuitive of like, I've got this idea, I feel like it's a need versus I'm hearing this from customers, and how are you balancing those two levers, if you will, in the decision?
Yeah, I think a lot of it does come from the confidence in your own experience. Like, I think part of the reason that Qualified even started and chat was a conversation was it came from the origin story is that Greg was the CMO of Salesforce, and he got asked by Mark Benioff, hey, you have this $2 billion pipeline number. Why did you miss it? Or why did you hit it? And he had a bunch of traffic that he was driving to his website, and but he couldn't figure out who was there. Why aren't people converting? What is the next step? Where are people dropping off? He's like, I have all these people on my website and I'm blind. So, but that process, I tell that story because the process of going through that, I think made him really confident in a lot of the things that he felt were problems for him back in the day of like that firsthand experience. And so by listening to himself, he was his own customer. I think in that way, he became a person that if I had this for me, man, this would be better. And I think we actually learned in building Signals is that we were venturing into an area of intent where it was similarly commoditized as chat is. There's a bajillion chat vendors out there. Similarly, everybody and their grandmother is trying to hawk their intent signals to you now on the internet.
Yes, they are.
You can't get away from it. We're like, and I think we realized that we were venturing out of the realm of inbound pipeline knowledge that we had and into an outbound area of where you're gathering data from, how you put these lists together, trustworthiness of data in a different way than we had become so concretely ground into with chat. Like chat was very, this is the truth. People are on your website. They're talking about it in this way. And it became very nebulous to figure out that other piece. So, and to like answer your question, Josh, the faith of finding out like what to go for, it's like, it came a lot from that personal experience. After that, once we started to put out initial feelers of, hey, we think we're going in this direction, it almost always started with, we have very forward-thinking marketing or forward-looking marketing content materials that we put out. So our first call pitch decks, I get on calls even today, talking to customers and prospective customers about the roadmap. And I'm literally just gauging their reaction to certain things that I pitch, how I'm positioning it, and seeing. I do calls now where I don't really pay attention to my own content. I'm more so watching the people that I'm talking to. And I look at their eyes. I look at their reactions to see is this actually resonating with you? As if I were in person. Don't do that in a work from home world. But it's been very revealing to say, we think we can recognize this problem. We have access to it because it's a natural next step from our product as it stands today. Let's go test out some feelers. And even some of the things that we've launched or announced this year, we've backed away from because we realized it wasn't as big of an opportunity. Not as many people were asking for it. It was more technically complex than we originally thought. And so without actually putting any engineering effort really behind it, we were able to actually pull away from it.
That's great. That sounds like you just laid out you kind of answered one of my next questions about how do you know what's going to work and what's not going to work? Because there's a huge engineering effort involved with creating something new. And to your point, it's much better to flesh it out with ideas before actually investing that engineering effort. One of the aspect I want to ask about was you talked about the market of chat, for example, being very flooded and saturated and things like that. Mm-hmm. What have you seen work well in terms of understanding the competitive landscape when you're thinking about evolving your product?
I think I learned that between Optimizely and Qualified, there was in both places, there was sort of this 800-pound gorilla in the room. And at Optimizely, it was Adobe. And after some time, it became Google entered the marketplace, although their product was never really that good. So it wasn't really a competitor, but it was always Adobe. Yeah. And
we were familiar at Adobe about Optimizely.
Yeah, we tried to be annoying enough to you that it caused some problems.
I felt it. I heard about it.
That's it. As a company that had, I think, topped out at one point at around 500 employees, I'll take that as a massive vote of confidence that we were sufficiently annoying.
Yes. Well done.
Thank you. So I think between there, learning from competing with Adobe and also entering a marketplace with Qualified at going up against Drift and also Intercom, people told us pretty much right at the beginning, why are you doing that? That space has already been taken over. Like, there's not that much like available market for you to go and gather up. And there was like, what was it like? Basically, what's your unique perspective? We actually came to the decision that Drift was trying early on to do some focus on more automate out the entire human. And we didn't totally understand that because really people buy from people. Like there's a human connection. You never are going to sign a $200,000 contract, $2 million contract through a chatbot. Even as good as AI bots are getting now, there's still quite a leap that there is left to go of making sure that you're understanding exactly what you need to understand. And so the perspective we came with was people buy from people, start with that really simple core premise and build from there. And it gave us enough of a wedge to say, all right, this is the core difference. Then who do we feel like they have who do we feel like our competitors have left as an underserved market? And for Qualified, it was people that were using Pardot. Pardot was like the forgotten child of the marketing automation world. Everyone was like, HubSpot, Marketo. And because we knew Salesforce from our executives and founders' roots, the connection was natural there. So leveraging that experience.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And with Optimizely, it came from, there was the grassroots, we're just going to sprinkle the market to anybody that wants to try this to then go and learn and get into your brain and win the market that way. So it was trying to provide access to people that didn't really have it and then go from there. I actually found that whenever we were competing with either side, there's a tendency to talk negatively about the competitor, to say, "Oh, idiots! How'd you ever do that? Like, that's such a dumb way to build your product." And we have one true motto at Qualify that's been from the beginning. We have many other things that we built on top of it, but it's be classy. Just be classy. Like if you see that your competitor is slinging some FUD or some fear, uncertainty, and doubt, don't necessarily stoop to their level of saying things that are negative about their product. Talk about how our product solves the problems. Now, that's one element to it, but I also, as a person who's trying to figure out where is our place in the ecosystem, I'm looking at them of why did they build it that way? Like, what was their logic that brought them to that decision? And it actually helps solidify the direction that we're going and saying, validate that, like, oh, we understand why you built it, and we fundamentally think something different, or we don't yet understand it, and maybe we'll figure that out later.
Yeah, I think you highlighted a couple of key things, if I can regurgitate this correctly, but I think the idea of like identifying gaps or underserved areas is super important because that's opportunity for you. And I think the other idea of like, understanding the why provides another data point for you to make your decisions about, well, they have information that they've obviously chosen a path for. Is that rationale work for us or not? I think those are great analysis. Okay, cool. I want to shift gears just a bit. Let's go into the kind of the product feedback. So you're on the solutions engineering side of the fence. So you're dealing with the customer facing side of the business, and you guys are gathering information all the time about what customers are reacting to well, what they're liking, what they're not liking. And from an organization standpoint, the people behind you, the product people, the engineering, product managers, et cetera, they're all keen to figure out how do we really empathize and know these users of ours so that we can build successful products. So I want to shift gears into this feedback back into the rest of the organization. So how have you seen that work? Okay. So in your experience, where do you get your best feedback?
Usually in a heated sales call. Like it's something where somebody comes off of a call or somebody comes into the meeting and they're just like, they're clearly upset by something, or most importantly, that they love our competitor. And they say, just so you know, I've had many calls that start with this. Just so you know, I am a huge fangirl, fan guy, or fanboy of this company. And I say, awesome. I love to hear that. That means that we can get into the weeds right away and figure out if we're going to be better or worse. And a lot of the product feedback, especially, again, I'm in these spaces are super commoditized. It becomes based on their current perspective of what they've used before. What do they wish they had? What are the years of toil that they've gone through that are like, this stinks? And it can be little things that build on top of it. Now, for the longest time, our product direction came from we would dig through the back end of how you configure Qualified with the operations people and say, hey, how would you build this? And one of the early examples that we had was we worked with a company called ThoughtSpot, still do. They're a customer of ours. And they were probably the biggest company that took an early bet on Qualified. And ThoughtSpot was basically like our first real foray into that Qualified for ABM type space. Like, if you could build routing rules, what do you think that would look like? Because it doesn't work today with what you're trying to do with HubSpot, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work with what you're doing with other people. Like, give me an idea what we do here, and just walking through it with them on. They're willing to be a customer. They've had the pain for years, and then this is a problem that, again, because we have this core premise of the problem we're trying to solve, gave us a very distinct question on what we wanted to ask. And they basically built, like, their input is in large part probably like 90% of what we have is that feature today.
So I just high pressure sales call or high impact sales calls where the customer has a positive experience with some other competitor often works really well for you. Secondly, It sounds like early customer into a given product, relying on that customer to help drive what they're looking to solve, which then can bleed back to the rest of the product. Is that fair?
I would clarify on the sales call. I want people that care. Like, I want you to care about the problem. If you come into the call and tell me that you're a fangirl or a fanboy of something, like use those words,
Those care. Those people care.
They care.
Those people care. And they they use this tool all the time. They're impacted whether or not it goes well because somebody else complains to them after that a lead didn't get created, got routed to somebody else. If you care about it coming into the call, I know that I'm going to be able to ask you questions and you're going to give me really good feedback on whether or not this works or it doesn't.
We had another guest a while ago talking about kind of product enthusiasts, kind of in the same vein of relying on those enthusiasts. It sounds somewhat similar to what you're discussing here.
I'd say similar. Sometimes I think of enthusiasts closer in line to like hobbyists, where you're like curious and more of like a tire kicker on. As a sales guy, I listen to some technologists or enthusiasts, and I'm like, this is a waste of my time. Because I just want to get to a decision. I want to get to something that's going to be meaningful for you faster. But if people that have felt pain and it's still on their responsibility, that to me level turns into a different type of care going into the problem because they have that pain and they need to solve it like today, hopefully yesterday.
You're almost like a therapist looking for clients. Like, tell me who's got the pain out there because I'm going to learn the most I can from you all.
Tell me where it hurts. Who hurt you?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
One kind of gotcha that happens when you're listening to customers and their feedback. So for example, you mentioned that first customer and they're kind of guiding how you built the ABM part of this. One little gotcha that sometimes happens is customers ask for something with words, but the actual pain point or the need might be a little bit different than they're describing, or maybe slightly, maybe even completely different than they're describing. How do you differentiate between that?
I wait for them to say it again. I think there's trying to get to someone that's actually curious about a product feature, whether or not you have something. We run into this all the time. My SEs, so we try to be as conversational in our product demos as possible. Show you a really custom representation of what our product could be for your team, and hopefully that gets your wheels turning on what this could mean for your team to buy it, to use it. In the spirit of trying to like create a conversational dynamic, loosens people up, gets them thinking about it. Sometimes it also means that they ask questions that doesn't really have much bearing on whether or not they decide to go with us. And it may be something that they thought of, but it didn't actually determine whether or not they liked their previous experience on a different product. There's a lot of different ways where they're essentially asking us. And sometimes I tell my team, like, they're just asking that just to ask a question. And that's okay. Like, people are trying to be human on the other side of the call. So that way it doesn't feel like it's just like a one-way monologue. But
Joe, did you just describe like every interaction we had together?
No. Actually, our interactions were great, Jeremy.
Sure.
Because I felt like you had real problems. I use a quote that you, brief sidebar, but I use a quote that you said as a way to verify or validate a lot of the things that we try to say. But I say I had a person that was a prospect and worked at a company, and then he became a prospect. And a part of his reason that he went with us was because he said our team provided not just data, but insights to the data. We became partners in how he used it long term. And so this is the thing that we strive for and how we offer this pillar of our differentiation. So
awesome. I totally saw that. I didn't mean to derail, but that's
so you get quoted quite often when we talk about insights. I don't bring up your LinkedIn. I've only done that like 4 times and say, this guy is the one that said it. If you don't believe me,
the guy,
if it goes badly, blame him.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, where was I?
Staying on target.
Yeah.
So what was you're talking about like when you are presenting, actually seeing reactions from people.
Yes.
And I derailed that.
That's okay. So I, as a part of my job and part of an SE's job is to figure out, why is this person asking that question? And the first thing you do is just tell me more. What makes you ask that? And as simple as it is, oftentimes we forget. And I can usually tell in how comfortable and how tenured a person is on my team if they launch into a discussion about this is what we do versus dig a little bit deeper. Now, I personally also have to balance not doing just that with also answering the questions, because there's nothing that riles me up more on the buying end than just a person who's constantly like, why? I'm like, dude, just tell me if you do this. So I think it's actually, you give a little bit of a teaser, like, we actually do it this way. This is our general slant on the problem, but tell me a little bit more of why, because that might change my answer, the direction that I go with you on this. And even presenting it in that sort of double-ended answer, it gets them to verify with me whether or not they've put any thought into that question, and if it's something that they really care about and digging deeper into. Because then that question, that complaint of, oh, you guys don't do this or you do this, well, then I've figured out how much time that they've invested in it. Is it a pain that we really need to solve?
Yeah. And maybe even if that's a feature, quote unquote, from some competitor, that you guys have something similar, or a different way to solve that, right?
Totally. So does that answer your question? I think that's
Yeah, I think you got it. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay.
So we talked about feedback and what that means, centralizing feedback. That's tricky within an organization. So getting your view from what you've heard from customers directly or indirectly, and then other organizations within, product or marketing or sales, that's not your team or whatever. How do you guys deal with that? The idea of feedback coming in from various angles.
This is the age-old question. The things that you hear in the field, do they make it back to product? And how do they make it back? And does anybody care what I'm saying out here? I've been through two real strong efforts, one successful, one not so successful, at doing this at Optimizely and then here. Optimizely was not successful. It was not a very good pre-sales to product interaction of how we collected feedback and then how it got translated into real developments that people were asking for. That organization in general followed much more of a existing customers are asking for this, or we know better than the market, we're going to build this instead. And so people may not have been asking for this, but they decided to build it because it was going to theoretically increase their total addressable market or something of the like. Qualified is different, and I think we benefit from, in large part, being a smaller company trying to get this going. By the time I had started to do it with Optimizely, we were probably over 350, 400 employees. And starting a program at that point is not impossible. It's still a really small company in the grand scheme, but it's harder if the company is almost 10 years old and you have a lot of people that have always been doing it this way. So in Qualified, there's always been a really consistent communication path from, again, that one-bedroom apartment. I'd sit on the balcony, I'd do my demo, I'd hear something, and then hang up the call and be like, hey, Bing, this is our chief product officer, this guy kind of likes this. What do you think about that? And then we'd go downstairs and we'd whiteboard it out. And that whiteboarding has still very much been a part of the fabric of how Qualified has developed its products. It's always get into a room and hash it out. And sometimes it takes 30 minutes. Sometimes it takes 2 hours. And I've found that my leadership here, both for me personally, but I'm also talking about my C-suite leadership, they really grok with that sort of experience. Like, let's just get in a room. It's kind of funny being in a remote work environment to try and get in a room and do that. But it really translates into sometimes you have to blow off that next meeting because this conversation is not done. We can't just go to the next thing. We have to fully flesh this out. So that mentality of starting early allowed us to have I can go and have that conversation and no one's egos are bruised. It's a conversation. We're going to just talk through this. And if I've had that good relationship with those people, then now when I'm trying to set up the systems and process to get it done, it's much more amenable on their end to receive the data points that we're providing. And it's down to the granular level of in Salesforce, you file a feature request. That feature request gets assigned to an account, which is tied to an opportunity. And actually, there's always some shifting. We can get into this if you'd like, but there's some shifting around of the strategic nature of one feature or another. It may only be tied to one particular opportunity that's not that high of a dollar amount, but it goes right up to the top of the prioritization. And others, you start to have to justify with the dollar amount that it's tied to in order to say, hey, this is really holding this back in a variety of ways. But the sheer system of it being in place it forces us to define exactly what people are looking for. It puts it in a place where people are looking all the time, Salesforce. It's tying it to dollars. I mean, especially in this economy, everybody's thinking about how to scratch and claw towards every dollar. And when it matters, we can point to this is a strategic account for us. Like this is a place where we want to invest, the direction we want to go. So
how do the other parts of your organization, like support or customer success, thinking about retention or marketing, how do you coordinate with them? If you've got feature A for customer B equals $C, how do you then coordinate with the other groups within the organization? So you're kind of not competing, saying support wants this and sales want this, who wins? How do you kind of get on the same page?
It's part of it is that the way, like on a tactical level, those feature requests that we log, they're all logged and they look very similar until you look at which team actually filed this. You can generally read a feature request and see what the slant is or what the angle is on the way it's written. Clearly written by somebody who's trying to implement versus trying to sell. The coordination actually usually comes from week over week. We'll have like executive board reviews, and so it's just like all the executives of the company, me as a representative from SEs, but also our CRO, CEO, CMO. Chief Customer Officer, CCO, COO, we're all in the same room talking about the company metrics. And it starts with sales pipeline or sales, like deals that are in flight. Then it's pipeline being generated by our opening team. And then it's customer retention. And those are the three pillars that we review every week. And usually in the course of that conversation, big topics will come up about the product. So they'll have already been logged. People are aware of these, but I'm in the same room as the chief customer officer. And so when we start to talk about, hey, we need to actually go and build this very specific feature because it's going to help this prospect or this newly signed customer, the chief customer officer is there. Like I have the interaction with him, and we both have the amount of data that we need to go and get into the details. And the conversation is long enough that we can actually have that in a full format. And it impacts each of those three pillars because if you try to do these things, the thing I learned from Optimizely is if you try to just do it in purely like people are yelling about it, that almost never helps coordinate because you have issues with some people are not good at writing, some people are not good at talking, some people are not good at justifying or feel uncomfortable doing it. And so if you actually shape it around these are the pillars of we need to win more deals, generate more pipeline, and retain more customers. Will this do one of those more effectively? That helps.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I think when you first started talking about this, it sounded like people in a room and just whoever had the loudest voice could say, this is my feature and this wins because I got the loudest voice. But I think you brought it home with this idea of like, it's necessary to have a lens or a framework to work through in order to help that decision-making process. If you don't have that, you are left with the loudest voice.
Totally. I am a relationship person. Like I am a person, I like to get to know the people I'm talking to, understand what motivates them, things that would make them mad and turn off to me. And so if that core foundation is what's helped me work with our chief product officer. So if I go to the headquarters and I'm say, listen, man, I'm glad I'm seeing you in person because I got to talk to you about this. There's stuff that's not coming across over Slack that like painting the picture on this, but we still need the rest of the support mechanisms. He's not just going to listen to me just because I caught him in the hallway. But if I know, hey, this is a little bit more color to this picture. So if it gets brought to you because of all these other systems, this is why it's coming up. He goes, got it. Okay.
Can you talk earlier when we had a preliminary conversation, you had addressed, I think you'd called it something along the lines of, or maybe I didn't use these words, but the idea of kind of internal empathy. Like you mentioned this earlier in the conversation, you collect data, great. You collate data, you collate feedback. You have to deliver it to the product side of the house. How you deliver it is as essential as what you're delivering. And can you talk a little bit about the idea of empathy on like how do you develop that empathy for the receiver of said feedback and what's worked best in those situations?
Totally. I mean, in most of the conversations, I usually think about it in the context of like a sales conversation, because I'm trying to figure out who is this person that I'm talking to on the other end. And for sales, it's like, are you new to your job? Are you 10 years into your job? Are you a person that hops between jobs? Are you an athlete? Are you a person who volunteers all the time? Those are, as crazy as that may sound, I like to go to that level of understanding of who I'm talking to, even for just a demo, because it helps understand like what is going to get you excited when I talk to you on the call. And within a few moments, I can tell whether or not I'm going to tell you a joke or I'm going to keep it super polished and professional. Internally, it's the same thing. I mean, because I'm a strange person and because I'm early at the company, I got to shape some of the culture at Qualified. And one of the things I started to do, I think I was 3 weeks into the job, I thought it would be funny to go and create little emojis for everybody, little bobbleheads, what we call them now. And so it's just your head cut out, and I would put it into Slack. And so your onboarding was complete after I made your emoji. And so that way you could use it or people could sign it. But those little emojis added a lot of it humanized a lot of people on the other side of your Zoom screen to there's an actual person that's doing these projects, that is trying to tackle this initiative, that is managing our support or managing whatever. I also selfishly, I got the chance to meet a lot of these people and get to know them and figure out like, are you quiet? Are you excitable? Like what's your background? And all that stuff that allowed me to then say, if I have to go to this person, they already know me. I'm the guy that made their bobblehead. And I can then talk to them on a very personal level of like, hey, okay, so this thing came up. How do you think that we should handle this? Come into the conversation with more of like it is two people talking rather than one person dive bombing into an interaction saying, we need this now. Because I think it's even when you can see another person, if you're not in the same room, it's harder and harder as you get further away to actually remember that this is another person with a kid that is screaming in between calls. They didn't sleep well. Maybe they're training and they're really tired, or all these other factors that come in. And so then it helps me figure out like human to human, how do I talk to you?
Yeah, it's an interesting parallel. You almost like you need that first moment of pause and listening and awareness to build empathy. And, from a sales perspective, we talk about that all the time in terms of collecting the real, discovering the real pain point, the real need, doing all the listening. And what you're saying is how important that is also to do the exact same mechanism on the inside. The same listening part of that is an important step of that process.
Totally. And I think one of the things I'm kind of even skipping over almost to the point is that developing the conversation of how to get something accomplished at a company, I feel like is rarely about the actual work. It's about the person and the challenges they're facing that day in the work. So are you going to be the person that's going to help them solve whatever pain that they have, make their job easier, make their life easier? Are you going to be a partner to them? Are they going to feel like you're going to work with them? And so much of that is outside of the actual ask. It comes from the fact that there's just someone else trying to exist and do a good job to the best of their ability.
Yeah. Great advice.
Well, that brings me to one of the things that you've been highlighting, which is what you're calling the circle framework for projects. Would you mind discussing what that is and how you use that really in your work?
Sure. It's kind of funny. It started as an analogy. I love analogies. So this started as an analogy to try and explain to a relatively new hire how I wanted them to approach a problem. And I was like, they kind of weren't getting it. And I was like, let me break this down. It's kind of like there's a series of concentric circles. You're on the outside right now. And so I went through this sort of visual with them of how to get closer to the root or the core of what they needed to solve. And the circle framework is like a series of concentric circles that are to try and communicate the phases of your understanding of a problem. Now, CIRCLE is, and it's an acronym of CIRC leads to execution, and CIRC is comprehension, innovation, renovation, and creation, CIRC. So CIRC, LE leads to execution. Thought I was pretty clever with that one. But this framework was a way for me to organize my thoughts of where am I on my understanding of a new problem. And I have found that, sure, there's like a phase of getting into a new product where you just have to do it. Like you don't really know what you're doing. You're just doing it. And it's everything from, for people that are athletes listening, it's like trying to throw a ball or trying to hit a particular dance step. For me, I'm like following like a programming framework. I'm building a new mobile app and I'm just following a guide. Like a lot of us like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm importing a library and I'm calling this function and I'm going to give it a ride. It's from there that you start to build into these later phases of innovation upon that initial comprehension of understand what you're doing, innovate a little bit, make these tweaks here and there. Then there's a later stage of renovation where you're tearing down wings of the house that you've built to then build anew and open up a different section of your process and your belief set on it. And then sometimes you just have to create whole new things. And you can't get to creation. You can't get to that core of creation in an intentional way, both with a project and also your career, without first building the comprehension, making the tweaks, trying to take shots here and there. So that notion of concentric circles has helped me work through that with that one employee. Wasn't as refined as it is now, but also other employees in the future to try and get them to think more holistically about their development and the projects that they're on.
Yeah, you mentioned projects and career, but it sounds like there's a lot of product kind of glimpses here too with that framework.
Yes,
awesome.
Definitely. It's funny, when I was kind of putting this pen to paper on that idea, my initial drafts had a bunch of like project management frameworks of like how it would compare to Agile or Waterfall. And I was like, it's kind of not that. It is, but it isn't, like, because those are so task oriented of trying to get a thing done.
Right.
Then that's the direction that it goes, because let's complete the project. And mine was more built around like building a more well-rounded perspective or view that led you to some conclusion later on.
Yeah, that's great. Joe, thank you so much for everything here today, and for joining us here on this podcast. Really appreciate your words and look forward to talking to you soon.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks, Josh. It was a pleasure to be here.
See you, Joe.
Hi, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd appreciate it if you could leave a review of the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to help spread the word. Our podcast is produced and designed by Jeremy and Joshua Wold. You can find our show archive and transcripts at productsforpeoplepodcast.com. We look forward to seeing you for our next episode, and in the meantime, we hope you experience some really great products. Thanks.